Hey everyone, and welcome to Bright and Early, the podcast for people building early stage startups. I'm your host, Brian Ray. I talk to entrepreneurs, product people, designers, and marketing pros to learn what works, what doesn't, and how can we apply those lessons to our business. My guest today is Rob Fitzpatrick. Rob is the author of The Mom Test, How to Talk to Customers and Learn If Your Business is a Good Idea When Everyone is Lying to You. You can find that book at momtestbook.com. Rob, welcome to Bright and Early.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. I came across your book. It feels like probably a year ago or so now. I heard it mentioned on, it's one of those things where like I remember hearing it for the first time on a podcast, and then there was several months that went by, and then all of a sudden, like everybody was talking about it, and it feels like it's just kind of getting a lot of traction in the bootstrapper maker, like indie market. So, for listeners who may not be familiar with your book, can you give us a little bit of background on how it came to be and just what it's about?
Yeah, I dropped out of grad school to start my first business as a techie. We went into Y Combinator back in 2007 and had a great time. You know, we were making tools. I was writing code. I was building product. We had a team of 4, basically all product people and tech people. And we never thought about talking to a customer or doing anything like that. But Paul Graham told us we had to. And we ignored him. We're like, nah, that's dumb advice.
You had to do that.
Yeah. Lean startup hadn't come out yet. So this was kind of like customer development existed, but it wasn't well known like it is now. And so we ignored Paul and we just built our product and locked ourselves in a lab. And then we managed to scramble together a seed round from really good investors, which was a miracle. But they happened to like us, which was more or less the same reason PG invested. And they kept saying, like, you got to talk to these guys. Like, what do your customers think? Like, and I was like, I don't know. It's the internet. I don't know. How do I know these people? And he kind of gave me an ultimatum. And so I made it my full-time job for the next 2 years to just go. I followed Steve Blank's book, The 4 Steps to Epiphany, religiously. Yes. It was my Bible. And I worked so hard and I was so miserable because I'm a natural introvert. I really didn't want to talk to strangers. I really didn't want to be doing sales. But I was like, I'm going to suffer for this cause for my team because I don't want to have to fire my friends and tell my investors I lost their money. And then the real kick in the pants was we went out of business anyway, because it turns out that just asking people for feedback isn't enough. And the big thing I learned is it's possible to ask the questions in the wrong way. And then the data you get back is corrupted. It's worse than worthless because it convinces you you're on the right track when you're not. And it took me a couple more years and the help of some advisors and talking to a ton of other entrepreneurs. But eventually I figured out a different way of asking the questions, which is much more like conversational, relaxed. It's not about your idea. It's about the customer's lives. It's about taking responsibility for finding the truth instead of expecting people to tell you the truth. And I was like, okay, this works. And it also works really well for an introverted techie like me. So I wrote down that approach into the book, The Mom Test. And yeah, I mean, people liked it. It's been... It's kind of become one of the standard guides for how to do this stuff at accelerators, universities, all over now, which is great to see.
Yeah. So why were those interviews that you initially did for that YC company back in 2007? Why were they bad? What were you doing wrong?
So I'll tell you the mistake. I make the mistake everyone listening is making. You go into a meeting and the other person goes, so what are you building? Like, tell me what it's all about. And immediately they've just queued you up to give a pitch. And so you give a pitch and then you're like, so what do you think? You know, would you use it? Would you buy it? But what's happened here is the entrepreneur's superpower is that people want to help you. They want to be supportive. When you put your heart on the table and you show them that like, I'm doing this crazy, exciting thing and I'm going for it, you know, they want to help you. And this is great because it's like what gets you in impossible doors is what gets you your first customer. But the other side of this is that it means that like when people are trying to be supportive, you're not getting honest feedback here. And by pitching your idea, you really zoom in the whole conversation about like small variations from what you've already built. Like you're never going to go, this is my idea. Someone's never going to go like, literally, you shouldn't even have bothered. There is no universe in which I care even a little bit about this idea. Yeah. Like, but that's the type of feedback you want because that's like step one of validating a business. Do they care about the problem? Yeah. But if you start by pitching an idea, you're never going to figure that out because now you're talking about features instead of talking about their life. And all you have to change to solve this, it's super simple. is before you pitch your business, you ask about their life. Like if you want to make a phone app to help people plan their business travel, instead of pitching your idea and going, what do you think? Because I guarantee you're going to get compliments and opinions. Instead of pitching, just go like, hey, when's the last time you took a business trip? They'll tell you, and you go, how did you plan it? And they go, oh, I just Googled. I mean, I bought the tickets on Orbitz. What do you mean? How did I plan it? And
Mhm.
you go, were there any issues? And they're like, no, it was easy. What? And you're like, oh man, like this person doesn't care. Um, they don't have the problem, or they don't know they have the problem. Like, do I want to go through this like nightmare burden of having to convince them they have a problem that they don't think they have? Whereas other times you talk to people and they're like, oh my God, that is the worst part of my life. I could talk to you for hours about how miserable this makes me. I tried hiring a personal assistant to do it, paid 50 grand a year, like nothing works. Like I tried using every app, every tool. You're like, oh wow, this problem is on fire for this
Okay.
person, right? They're
Yeah.
desperate for a solution. And it doesn't work for every type of product. Like you couldn't test something like Uber like this, because people didn't like Uber's innovation is around the usability and the product. It's like a usability based innovation. Airbnb was the same way. But for anything that solves a problem, which is where customer development has massive learning potential, and really all of lean startup has massive learning potential, it's like you need to keep the conversation focused on them, not your idea.
So that's interesting. You said towards the beginning of that the entrepreneur, we're responsible for finding the truth. And oftentimes we think that the customer is responsible for telling us for telling it to us. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, Paired against what you were describing of don't go into the pitch, don't pitch them for what we think that the truth is. So validate that for me. How do you like? What are the types of questions that you ask as follow up questions to the series that you just gave us there? Tell me about your life. How are you solving this now? Da, 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 da. What are the next level questions that start to validate the truth or uncover a potential new solution?
So where you're trying to get to is you want to understand what they're already doing and why.
Uh huh. Okay.
And you run that as a conversation like you would with any other human being, like with a friend. Like, uh, friendship is practically defined by understanding the other person. And if you had a friend and they just got dumped by their husband or wife, you wouldn't be like, great news, I'm working on a dating app. Do you think you would use it to find your next husband or wife? Like that would be weird and sociopathic.
Yeah.
And you also wouldn't go like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how upset does
Mm,
being dumped make you? Like how likely are you to rebound? Like that's not how we get to understand human beings in our lives. And for some reason, once business enters the equation, we all put on our lab coats and get our clipboards and we start acting like scientists instead of friends. My view is like you want to understand your customers like you understand your friends. You want to know how their life works and why they're making the decisions they're making. Like if they have a problem that they haven't solved, why haven't they solved it? Like
mhm.
maybe they just don't care, or maybe they've tried desperately to solve it and none of the existing tools are good enough. In both cases, they have an unsolved problem, but the implications of those two variations are very different for you as an entrepreneur. And so you'd ask whatever questions like, oh, why did you do it that way? Like, have you tried this? What did you Google for? Can you talk me through when it went wrong? Have you ever tried doing it differently? Why not? Um, oh, you've never researched it. Like, it seems like a big deal. Does it actually not matter that much to you?
Yeah.
None
Yeah.
of this is about your idea, but it's definitely on the topic of your idea.
Right.
And it's just like, what are they already doing and why? That's the core of it.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, you understand them and you kind of get permission to go into pitch mode. You're like, hey, it's, like no worries, but like I'm working on this thing that deals with this issue that sounds like it's a really big deal to you. If you've got another 5 minutes, I'd love to tell you about it. And then that's much more of a traditional sales conversation. You pitch and then you ask them to give you some money, some time, an introduction, something to prove that they really care. Because otherwise, again, you're back to getting empty compliments.
Yeah. Okay. So, and along the way there, when you're asking those follow up questions, if it could be that, yeah, this is a legit problem. Like the thing that you're trying to solve, it's valid. They have it on a very regular basis. However, the solutions that they're currently using are adequate, and that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of your job as a product designer to be like, okay, on the variables they care about, like maybe the things they care about is performance and speed or whatever, beauty, like whatever they care about. Like, can I go into my like visionary product designer mode and make something like Peter Thiel says you need to be 10 times better for product based, like, feature
Yep.
improvements to be good
Yep.
enough to get noticed? Like, do I, like Airbnb did it, Uber did it. Do I think I can do it? Like, the customer doesn't know they need it, but can I make something so brilliantly better that once they're holding it in their hands, they'll like never let it go?
Yeah.
That's like one route to go, but it's really easy to delude yourself when you're going that route because we're wildly optimistic about how big of an improvement we're making. The other route is like, wow, they have a burning problem they're trying to solve that is hurting them and they want to fix it. And no one has fixed it. Like maybe they fixed it for the mass market, but this particular type of customer, it's their life's still hard. And like, I can do that. I can do that for them. And that leads to like, all these interesting opportunities. And personally, that's the type of opportunity I'm attracted to because it's a lot easier to verify in advance that people are going to use it and pay you. Whereas for the product-based innovation, like my background's in video game design, but I think that's a terrifying industry because you don't know if people want your game until you're finished making it. From a business perspective, I would much rather know they're going to pay me first and then build it. Rather than the other way around. But that means you have to be focused on these product type idea or problem type ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've been using your book to do some customer interviews on this idea of remote tools for remote teams. And my hypothesis is that remote work is lonely by default. Like the default state is isolation, and remote first teams have to actively work against that in a way that co-located teams don't. It just happens passively. And so
Sounds believable.
in the office, the big complaint is my manager's always tapping me on the shoulder. That's really annoying. Okay, we know that. My hypothesis is that over time, remote workers are like, nobody taps me on the shoulder anymore. Okay, but the thing is that like everybody I've talked to, in terms of managers that I've spoken with, like, yeah, this is a for real thing. We use Zoom, 15.5, Slackbots, Donuts, etc. Like all of these tools, but they're not exactly like, and they totally suck. And so, knowing the 45 seconds that I just gave you, my sense right now is problem is validated. Existing hacked together solutions are relatively adequate. What advice would you have for me to say, okay, here are some things that you might want to consider doing next?
I'd be really interested in what else they tried that they gave up on and why they gave up on it. So for example, if like, yeah, we used to do like on my team, we had this problem and it's like, oh, we used to do every morning, we're just going to get on a video call for 5 minutes so we can see each other's faces. And we stopped doing that because like every morning was just a scheduling tax. And it was like, and it was like, okay. And it's weird if like only 2 people show up and it's like it. And so we're like, okay, so we tried other solutions. We tried like a Slack channel where we made jokes or a WhatsApp group where we did this. And it's like, and we discarded each of them for certain reasons. And I always find non-consumption fascinating because there's as much to learn about what they aren't doing and what they gave up on and what they haven't tried as there is to learn about what they are doing. And sometimes if you only look at what they are doing, you get a very skewed perspective. There's a lot of information in the graveyard of, discarded solutions. So I'd want that. And then I'd also, I'd be super curious if they're still looking for alternatives. It's like, is where they're at a brilliant solution, or is it kind of still this like uncomfortable work in progress, like a Band-Aid, and they're like, yeah, this is freaking perfect, or are they kind of like, it's like, it's doing the job. But then also there's this point where like your customers can't always tell you, like they don't always know. It's your job to understand them. Like think of it like a patient-doctor relationship. The patient comes in and they're kind of like, yeah, I got this pain in my stomach. It's not a big deal though. I can kind of live with it. And the doctor's like, no, you need surgery right now. Because they know that there's like a bigger issue lurking that's going to develop, or like the patient doesn't. But then also it'd be weird if like the patient came in and the doctor, before even asking the patient what was wrong, was just like, take these pills.
Yeah.
Like there's kind of this give and take. But one of the big myths about customer development and customer understanding is that you're going to be able to get to perfect certainty. And you're just not. What you're trying to
Mhm.
do is build a better than zero foundation of insight so that when you take your visionary leap, and you're still going to have to, like entrepreneurship can't be done by robots, like you're just trying to build the most solid foundation possible for your visionary leap. You're not able to remove the visionary leap. And it's foolish if you have zero information and you take your visionary leap, because it's just like man, you could have spent 2 days and talked to a couple of people and you would have had a dramatically improved chance of success.
Yes.
It's like you don't want to go out of business for a stupid preventable reason,
Yeah.
but there's still plenty of heroic and authentic reasons to go out of business. It's not like you never go out of business. It's just like don't go out of business for dumb reasons.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I really liked about, or I liked about the tone of your book as you went through it was, hey, this is about reducing uncertainty. We can't eliminate risk, and it feels like, as the years have gone on and there have been enough examples of, just gigantic failures of these huge startups because they didn't know their customer, et cetera, et cetera. And Lean Startup has done a wonderful service, to the community, and but that uh, there's almost been a swing all the way in the other direction of um, like don't write any code at all ever until you have $5,000 in pre-sell MRR or something. It's like, there's at some point you have to believe in your vision and you have to make the leap. So I appreciated that about the
Yeah,
comment,
I
Greg.
think a lot about a like a low hanging fruit metaphor. Like if your startup is you're in an orchard, right, and your startup is to build an apple picking machine, like, and there's trees in front of you, and like someone's going to buy apples, right? So you need to develop this apple picking machine to sell them apples. Like it would be crazy to spend the time to build that machine before you just picked the one apple that's right in front of you and tried to give it to someone and see if they want it.
Mhm.
It's like that's a low hanging fruit. Like take it, but that doesn't mean you need to go and like manually pluck every apple in the orchard from the highest branches, right?
Yeah.
There's easy stuff to learn in clever ways, and there's stuff that honestly you can't. And it's like I was talking to this team, and they're like, I'm like, oh, what are you guys stressing out about? What are your big questions? What do you need help figuring out? And they're like, we're not sure if our year 7 expansion plan to China is going to work. And I was like, dude, come on. You've got so many things that are going to kill you sooner than that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, it's okay. That they're like, but it's a major unsolved risk. And it's like, that's okay. Like, you're going to have major unsolved risks. The point's just like, deal with the easy ones.
Hmm.
Like, if it's major and easy, like, you need to deal with that. And if you walk into a VC office and you're like, our strategy is to grow through content marketing. And they're like, cool, how's your content marketing going so far? And you're like, we haven't done it yet because we need a content marketing team. I guarantee you there is a 0% chance you're getting funded because that's a low hanging fruit that you haven't picked. And you can't ask other people to give you resources to build the machine until you've picked the low hanging fruit yourself. Like you're going to get laughed out of the room politely and silently every time.
Hmm. True. So one other thing, Rob, that came up in a few of these conversations is that the manager would just begin to offer up. One thing that we really are struggling with, um, time zones. Like this is not solved. Or yeah, we have different tax burdens in all of these different states. That's da 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 da. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not entirely sure if I'm interested in that problem. And I'm not passionate about time zones. Like, I'm not sure I could get up for that. But what's your take on um, when the conversations begin to, when you're asking them about their life instead of telling them about your product, instead of pitching them, and they start offering up other things entirely unrelated to what your original hypothesis was? What's your approach to thinking about that?
Yeah, so people say like a lot of the advice about interviewing and stuff, I think is dead wrong. And I think it gets into people's head. Like there's this belief that like you can only ask open-ended questions. But like if you only do that, or like you must be entirely Socratic and just let them talk and like never offer anything yourself, or like never bias, like it's hard, right? Because like you say, they wander off track and then it's like, well, I got a ton of information about something I don't care about.
Right.
Like that's not a good use of anyone's time. The way I see it is like it's like bowling lane. Like you got to put the bumpers on to keep them out of the alley, like the gutters.
Hmm.
Like you put these things and you let them bounce around inside the space you care about. And when they get off track, like you kind of need to pick them up or nudge them back on track. And the way you do that is probably going to be biasing, but like fine, you can fix that. So you're talking about remote work, and they start talking about budgeting. You can just be like, hey, listen, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you were saying something earlier I was super interested in. Would you mind telling me more about how you guys deal with bonk?
Yep.
And like, you've done two things. Like, you've nudged them back onto the topic, which is normally biasing because it's like saying, hey, I want to talk about this part of the problem. But then you're solving the bias because you're shifting the attention back to the specifics in the past of how they're already doing it and why.
Mhm.
And people generally, unless they're a sociopath, they only lie to you uh, optimistically and accidentally, or because they don't understand themselves. So you go like, do you think you would ever do this? Or would you ever use a product which did this? Or like, what would your dream product do? They get very optimistic, fluffy. They don't know what they want. They'll just say stuff. And they're trying to sound smart and they like the sound of their own voice. And they'll just give suggestions. They're like, yeah, I'm helping. It's like a fun thing for them to do.
Yeah.
So you just need to counterbalance that by saying, oh, and how did you do it last time?
Yeah.
Like they go, yeah, we really need time zones. And you go, well, how did you do it last time since you don't have time zones? So they're like, oh, well, we just ignored it. Oh, was that a big deal? No, it didn't really matter. You're like,
Right.
okay, cool. It's like, bring it back to their life whenever you can, but you can nudge them onto the topic that you need.
Got it. Yeah. Or, I mean, it's not even that they're lying or genuinely intending to, to lead you on the wrong path. People truly believe that if you offer, if there's a way that is 2 times better that I can use in the near future, yeah, future me is totally going to do that. That is just not
Yeah.
that's just not how it works.
I mean, future me doesn't even want to see the friends on Saturday that I agreed to see on Friday. You know, it's like future me is super lazy, but like
Yeah,
people have fascinatingly low self-awareness about this.
yeah,
Like, just look at the whatever, the dump yard of broken New Year's resolutions. Like, people don't know what they're going to do in the future. So you can't bet your business on someone's deluded self-belief about future them. You got to
mhm,
look at their what they're already doing and then make your own decisions as an entrepreneur. Like, that's why it's your job to innovate. You're not building a
yeah,
product by committee. You're just trying to understand the people you're serving
mhm.
so that you can make a good decision yourself.
Yeah, that's right. The New Year's resolution analogy is a really good one because that list of things is always that logically, yeah. Would you do if you did these things? Would it lead to a better life? Would it lead to more
Yeah.
happiness? Yes, in almost every case.
Yeah.
And
Does this
that's
matter
also
to you? Yes.
yeah,
I'm going to learn French.
yes,
I'm
that's
going to
right.
learn to play the drums.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so then we're in agreement there, obviously. So when we asked them about the past and what they've done before, we also know that people's memory is very unreliable. So how near to like current solution? What are you paying for right now? Or what have you tried before? How far back in time can we go and still expect reliable information?
I don't know. As you say, yeah, memory is fuzzy, especially when you start putting on the why narratives. Like, why did you do it that way? Talk me through that decision. But there's also more anchors into reality, and they're worth more than nothing. And
Yeah.
like, if you're asking about hypothetical future stuff, like, would you ever, would you like, that stuff, I believe is negative value. Whereas the past anchors, even if they're like, a bit fudged with the passage of time, like, I think we're at least working within reality.
Okay.
I'm happy with that. And
Okay.
you're also not going, like, you can't eliminate all biases. Like, it's back to the low hanging fruit, right? You're just trying to have fewer biases so that you can get better information, so that you can make a better decision. And also, like, people ask all the time, how many customers do I need to interview? Like, do I need to get statistical significance? And it's like, I hope not unless you've got a million years to live. Like, it's just not possible. And also, reality keeps changing and the market keeps changing and technology keeps changing. So if you're trying to interview a bajillion people, the world's going to change by the time you see, like, you get through this list. So you kind of try to get to the point of diminishing returns where you're like, okay, I've kind of heard it all before and I kind of know what I'm doing. And I kind of think I've answered the big questions. And then, like, yeah, let's, like, I don't know. And then you try to find an ongoing process where each week, like, you try to find a clever way of reducing the time cost. Like, maybe you set up like one business lunch a week with someone in your industry, or like two a week. And you're like, cool. That means I have 2 free customer conversations a week that, like, aren't
Mhm.
a nightmare to set up. And it's like, okay. One of my friends' companies, Songkick, on Fridays, they would invite their most active users into the office Friday afternoons and throw them a party. beer, live music, all sorts of stuff. And then they just mingled with their users. And like that was their customer learning by throwing a party. The employees loved it. The customers loved it. Bonus, right? So there's like this initial blast of like, I need to do interviews to get foundational understanding of what these people care about. And then after that, I'm going to choose an acceptable number of hours per week and then design some ongoing process so that as I'm building my thing, I'm always like getting a trickle in of this learning and sanity checks.
Okay. So that makes a whole lot of sense. The like anchor those things as near to the current as possible. Even if we are going back in time, it's definitely better than asking them about the hypothetical future, but maybe like flag it as we go, or make some notes. Which thinking about that reminded me, you have this section in the book where you have like some shorthand, like note taking symbols and things that you
Yeah.
use. Can you talk about that a little bit, and how you found that to be useful?
Yeah. So I trust my own memory a lot less than I trust my customer's memory. So, cause like I'm optimistic, right? Like I want my business to work and like I want my team to think I did a good job when I had a conversation. And if you come back and you go, hey team, great news. Everyone hates it. No one cares at all. They think we're stupid and our idea is stupid by extension, like, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And like, that's great. We just saved a ton of time. Like people aren't as excited as you would hope they are. Your team rarely sees that as good news because in their hearts, they're expecting you to bring back, yeah, we're on the right track. That's what they want to hear. And so your brain does this gymnastics where it reinterprets what you're hearing in the best possible light. And then that's what you convey to your team. And then they convert that into the best possible light. So there's like 2 layers of optimism ruining your data.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'm not that smart, like there's people on my team who are much smarter than me. And I found that if I go to them and I kept what the customer said in my head, then when I go to my team, I'm coming to them with a decision. We need to do this because I learned it from the customers. We need to change the product this way. We need to switch direction in this way. And that made me a dictator accidentally. I was trying to run a democratic team, but because I held all the customer learning, I'd inadvertently made myself the dictator. We have to do it my way because the customer said.
Mm.
They're like, what? Show me. And I'm like, come to the meetings. They're like, I don't have time for that. And it's like, too bad. Do it my way. And that sucked. And then we went out of business. And it's much better if you write down. And what I try to write down is like exact words, but you don't have time to do that. So you write like a few words and then you put like an emoticon next to it. Because like, yeah, that's a problem. Carries very different meaning if they said it with rage and fire or if they said it with indifference. So I slap an emoticon, a few words of a direct quote. Then what I do with my team is instead of telling them my conclusions, I avoid making any conclusions myself. I avoid making any decisions about strategy, about product, about anything. Instead, I sit down with them and I go, let me talk you through the customer conversations I had. I walk them through, yeah, they said this, they were really angry. They said this, not a big deal to them. They said this, they said it costs $100,000. That's got a little dollar sign next to them. And I basically give them like an abridged version of what mattered from the conversation with like this emotional markup. And then the conversation, the data is loaded into everybody's head. You've outwitted your optimism filter. And then you can use everyone's brains on the team to come to a better strategy decision, product decision, pivot decision, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Otherwise you're just making yourself this bottleneck and dictator.
Totally. You've got in the book, you've got like a dozen or so of those symbols.
So I use emotional signals. Then the other ones I use a lot is problem, goal. So like I use a lightning bolt for a problem. I use a little like football goal for a goal. Mm-hmm. Background information is a little mountain, like an arrow. And then whenever they mention an obstacle, like, I'd love to do that, but IT says we can't, that's a little square. And then if they mention another person or company or a task, like a next step or something they want, like I mark those specially. And then at the end of the meeting, I scan looking for the people icons or the star icons. Mm-hmm. And I was like, so like the next steps are this, this, and this. And you said this person in this company would be great to talk to. Do you feel comfortable making an introduction at this point? And if they're like, I'm like, hey, no worries. Where would we need to get to, or what would we need to provide for you to feel excited to make that introduction? Yeah. And they're like, well, if you could give me this case study, I'd be glad to make that intro. And then you're like, okay, cool. And that again is outwitting your own optimism, because otherwise like every promised intro seems like a real intro, and it's not. Like a lot of them are conditional and you need to understand what the conditions are. And then you go, okay, they need us to have 12 enterprise clients before they're serious, before he'll introduce me to my boss. That's not happening for years. Whereas this person just needs to see a one-page spec sheet. I can do that.
Yeah.
And that's how you start to evaluate and sanity check a pipeline. Because otherwise they're all just names in a list. They all look equal, but they're not. Like, you need those conditions behind the intros, behind the next steps.
Mm-hmm. You talk about even that as being a form of commitment. Like there's one thing of, oh, okay, hey, yeah, we're on the way. Can we get your credit card? But you, depending upon what stage you're at in developing your idea, the commitment of, oh yeah, I will introduce you to a friend to talk to. That sort of social capital, like you consider that a
Absolutely.
fair commitment and validation?
Basically, you're looking for anything that costs them something to give you.
Mm-hmm.
So an introduction to an inferior. So if you're talking to a manager and they introduce you to a report, that doesn't carry very much weight because the manager's happy to waste their report's time. It's like they just want to get rid of you. Oh yeah, talk to this dude. Whereas an introduction to someone's boss is a huge commitment because they're risking reputation.
Yeah.
They're risking getting fired if the boss thinks their time's being wasted. So like, not all introductions are equal. And the same way someone giving you their time, it's like, yeah, let's put another meeting in the calendar. Well, if you and that person had a great time together and you were laughing and having beers and they see it as like a nice break from their day job, it doesn't mean as much as like, if they're like, oh, like I'm busy, I really don't have time for this, but yes, this is important. Let's find some time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of weighing their seriousness. I design these ahead of time because it's really hard to do in the moment. It takes a little bit of creative thought. But you're going, what's the thing I could ask for? That's not so much as to be cheeky or ridiculous. Like if you're idea stage, you can't ask people for money usually anymore. But you might be able to ask them for an introduction, or you might be able to ask them for a chunk of their team's time to look through a product spec or wireframes or paper prototype. And you're looking for the thing that's like acceptable to ask for that they won't give you unless they actually care.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I mean, and that's there's an art to that. Like you described, like there's some feel there that,
again, I do it with my team. Like it's the sort of thing where like I have stupid ideas and I go, oh, like, and then you sit down with your team and you go, hey, if this meeting goes well, what's the thing I should ask for?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't go well, you don't ask for it because like that's not happening, right?
Yeah.
If it's not going well, they don't have the problem, they don't care, they don't like you. You just go, hey, thank you so much for your time. Let me get out of your hair and give you some extra lunch break.
Yeah.
People love that. But yeah, if it goes well, you almost always want to ask for permission to tell them about the product. And then if they like that, you ask for a commitment of some sort to figure out if they're a customer or not.
Hey, listeners. We'll get back to the interview in just a second, but this is a great time to pause and let you know that Bright and Early is brought to you by Transistor.fm. Transistor offers you professional podcast hosting and analytics. They host this very podcast, and listen, y'all, it could not be any easier. Product is ridiculously easy to use. If you've got a question, Justin and John, the guys behind the software, are super responsive. I've needed to reach out a time or two for some help. They were all over it. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast for your business, just pop on over to Transistor.fm and let them know that Brian sent you. The other thing you say in the book that you should go into each conversation with are 3 big learning goals. So can you like give some concrete examples, or like give some examples of what would those 3 things be? I'm walking into my next conversation.
Yeah. So one of my little like projects some years ago was universities have all these researchers, and the researchers are coming up with patents and intellectual property and projects and all of this, and some of them can be commercialized. So big research university like University College London, they'll spin out a bunch of these patents as like standalone businesses with shared IP. So the university will keep some, the researcher will keep some, and then they'll like build a team around it to try to commercialize it. And this is obviously a hassle, right? There's like tens of thousands of patents that they're like, okay, which ones have potential to be commercialized? And there's like progress for that. And there's all these things, right? And so it was like this interesting, complex space that I felt was worth a lot of money. And I wanted to build some software to basically like help these. There's a team responsible for this called technology transfer inside these big universities. And that's their job, is to like identify commercially viable patents and then spin them out into businesses. I was like, I'm going to support these guys with software, because I talked to them and it's like, wow, they're using Excel for everything. That's all they have. It's just an Excel sheet with tens of thousands of patents, and they like look through it. It seemed like madness to me. And then it's like Post-it notes. And I was like, okay. So early on, I was kind of like, well, does this matter to them? Like, do they care? That was my learning goal. It's like, do they even like, are they happy? Maybe they're happy with Excel and Post-it notes. So that's like my only learning goal at first. So I go into the conversation. I'm like, talk me through how it works. Why do you do it this way? Have you tried anything else? And I'm going to ask dozens of questions, but they're all around this core learning goal of like, do they even care or are they happy? Because like as a technologist, I was horrified. Excel, oh no. But like, maybe that's okay. And then like it shifted in, and my next big learning goal was like, okay, do they have a budget? Because universities notoriously, like they find it really easy to hire people and pay salaries, but then they have no discretionary budget to buy anything else.
Okay.
So I'm like, and some departments do, and other departments have nothing. And so you can be like, I'm going to save you 10 million a year. And they're like, you know what, we already have budget for that 10 million and I can't find a budget for 1,000 to like buy this software to save that 10 million. It's just like, not, so I'm like, okay, does the budgeting allow for it? So that's my learning goal. And that led to a whole series of conversations. And the reason I say like 2 or 3 is it's really pointless to go into an interview with like 20 questions pre-planned, because like it's going to make a really rigid, static, like unpleasant, scientific, on a scale of 1 to 5, it's like boring for the recipient. Whereas if there's like 1 or 2 big things you're trying to learn about and talk around, you could just be like, wow, that sucks. Tell me more about that. And like, boom, the floodgates open up. And I found for me 2 or 3 is like a natural amount to fit in a conversation. Sometimes it's 1. That's enough. And you don't need to repeat yourself. Once you've got a satisfactory answer to one of your big learning goals, like that's no longer a learning goal. So you're not trying to go through like this whole series of 20 questions in every conversation. You're trying to learn the next important question that you're worried about. And then you add that to your knowledge base. And like, so you're asking different people, different stuff, depending on how much, you know, how much you've learned.
Okay. So like, do they care? Do they have budget? Are they satisfied or unsatisfied with their current solution? Like,
Yeah,
that's a natural progression through the.
It was for that type of like heavily like universities act like governments or big enterprises. They're like very rigid in that way. If I was talking to someone smaller, like I was talking to an agency about some software we're making, and for me, my number one goal was like, does this cost them money, and do they really care? Like, do they care enough to change their workflow? Because what agencies have is they're really busy, and for them, like training staff in new software is losing billable hours.
Yes.
So it's like, I might sell my software to them for 10 grand, but they're going to lose 50 grand of billable hours to transition their workflow onto it. So I'm like, do they really see the financial value of solving this problem differently? So like, I really love the business model canvas. I know it was super trendy for a while and then it fell out of fashion, but it's still my like go-to mental tool. And what I do is like, for any idea, like there is a most risky part that is most likely to kill you first. And you sort of like go through, and in some cases it might be like, can I manufacture this cheaply enough? And then I'm not talking to customers, I'm talking to manufacturers, suppliers, and industry experts. In other cases, the burning question might be like, is it legal? And then I'm talking to a buddy who's a lawyer, and I'm like helping him with his blog in exchange for free legal advice. Like there's not loads of people have tried to put like a 1, 2, 3 process on this, and it doesn't work. It works if you happen to have exactly the same type of business as the person who's making the process. But if you're doing it for yourself, it's like, it's much better to be like, okay, like, where am I at? What's like scariest? What do I need to know first? What's like the next linchpin? And then you just kind of go through them.
Yeah. That's great advice. We only have a couple of minutes left here, so I want to say thanks again, Rob, for your time.
My pleasure.
What do you like to do in your spare time? What do you?
Sailing's been my my main hobby.
Really?
A couple of years ago, when I'd been running like an education agency business, and we were trying to like productize and trying to do. It was like a good agency, but we could never turn the corner to products. So after like 3 years, we shut it down, but it had done well and my books were doing well. So I was like, okay, like let's tick off a life goal. And one of my goals had been to learn to sail and then sail across the English Channel by myself. So I was like, all right. So I like took the course. After like a week, I didn't even know how to sail yet. I did the course Monday to Friday. I woke up the next morning, Saturday. I picked up my laptop, put it in my lap. I hadn't even got out of bed yet. I went onto eBay and I hit buy it now on a boat.
Oh my gosh. When was this?
This was like 3 years ago.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, I better learn how to sail now. So I like picked up the boat, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I moved it. It was like near London, and I moved it to Southeast England, and then part of the mast fell off, which is a problem for a sailboat, and
That
so I lifted it
sounds
out of the
like a big
water.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, like the whole boat's destroyed. So I was like, this is great, actually. I put it in the boatyard and I spent 4 months doing full time manual labor, just like repairing the hull, sanding it down,
Oh,
rebuilding it.
yeah.
And then I spent like 2 years, well, 1 year living in the boat full time, and then another like year and a half part time, and basically bringing it from London to Barcelona through the French canals. And
That's
now it's in
amazing.
Barcelona with me. And like,
Nice.
that's a good one. Then
That's
apart from that, normal stuff, video games, writing, Netflix, you know.
so did you accomplish the life goal at some point to sail the
Yeah.
you did nice,
Yeah,
congrats,
across
man.
the channel, went from London to France. It was super anticlimactic. It's like really easy. You just like set the sails and then you sit there for 8 hours and you're in France. It's like I was like, oh well, that was. I didn't even need to know how to sail for that. Like,
I'm
but
sure
yeah,
that
it
was
was cool.
yeah, that's
I had
lovely.
great fun, and like the French canals were really fun. Like I arrived in Paris as France was winning the World Cup.
Oh
So
my
there were like
gosh.
riots breaking out. I pulled in the boat, and a bunch of kids were like, "You have a boat?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Let's party." And so they like took me picnicking, and we watched the
Wow.
riots, and everyone setting cars on fire. And then I took them sailing. We had a good time.
That sounds like the beginnings of a really interesting novel. Um, does your boat have a name?
Yeah, it's called Spores, which I love, and this is maybe a nice inspirational slash cautionary tale closing note. So the dude I bought it from, a dude named Leslie, he in the '80s he'd been like a punk rocker, you know, and the name of his rock band was Spores, Spores. And then he became like an accountant or something, and he was in London. He was like so busy, and you know, in his like 40s, he bought the boat as this like return to youth, and he renamed it from the Samantha to the Spores because he didn't want anyone to get the wrong idea about a woman. And you know, he wanted to like re-embrace his wild youth. But then he was so busy with work. He owned the boat for 3 years. He put a brand new engine in it, spent a bunch of money on it. He never sailed it once in 3 years of ownership, and
Wow.
then he sold it to me for a fraction of what he bought it for, derelict and destroyed.
Mhm.
And everyone asked me, they're like, "Wow, that's a terrible name for a boat, Spores. Aren't you going to change it?" And I was like, "No, I love it because like I love
Yeah,
this idea of like this like failed midlife crisis and how like actually like at a certain point, if there's something you want to do, it's like you got to like
gotta
make the
do it.
time and do it. You know, you
Mhm.
can't just like I don't know." So it was part of my getting away from London, getting away from workaholism, the move to Barcelona, trying to embrace a bit more leisure. And yeah, I love it. It's been I love the boat as a symbol and also the boat as a boat. Although it's falling apart. It's an old boat, so I need to get it back in the boatyard now.
Well, good luck with that. Good luck with it. My guest today has been Rob Fitzpatrick. You can find his book at momtestbook.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Rob Fitz. Rob, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and good luck with your businesses, everybody.
Alrighty, y'all. I've got my hot cup of coffee here, so let's do some closing thoughts. The idea at the very top of the interview just completely resonates. Just doing customer interviews is not enough. In fact, sometimes some of that data can be worse than no data at all. Actually, my newsletter topic was on that very idea just a couple of weeks ago, and it's because I mean it's just something that I've observed. I observed in myself, like earlier on in my career, and have just seen, many people doing it at different startups along the way. It's so, you've got great intentions, um, to ask people, what do you think about this? Would you buy this? If we built X feature, would you, would you then sign up for our product? All of those things. It's funny. It feels like yeah, of course, those are the kinds of questions that you ought to ask. That's what you would ask somebody. If I did this thing, then would you whatever? It that feels like a common sense thing to ask. But as we dug into there, unfortunately, people are way too optimistic about their future selves behavior. And I think that hopefully, like, if that doesn't already resonate with you and kind of change the way that you're thinking about this, then the example of New Year's resolutions, I think, just really drives it home, to realize, oh yeah, totally, I do that. everybody I know does that. It's just such a cliche, the New Year's resolution, and some of them do stick, for sure, but most of them don't. And it's just a perfect example of, yeah, for sure, doing this would be a better thing. However, when it really comes down to it, and I am, presented with making that choice in my day-to-day life, I'll probably just stick with routine or habit or what I've been doing. It is the exact same thing when you're trying to create a new product and get somebody to switch from what they're currently using to your new thing. So questions like, do you like this? Would you buy this? If we added X, would you be more likely to sign up? Those sound like good questions. Unfortunately, um, following those answers can oftentimes actually lead you, can be worse than you sitting in your office in your own brain coming up with the idea and then doing that, which the last 10 years worth of narrative in the startup world is how bad of an idea that is, to do that very thing, to sit in your office in your head, come up with a thing and then build only that. That yeah, it's just, it's been, well shared and beaten over everybody's heads that that's such a terrible thing to do. You got to get out of the building. Okay, yes, that's true. You just got to get out of the building in the right way. And so, yeah, I mean, in short, the easiest way to improve the way that you're conducting customer interviews is just don't talk about your idea, ask about their life. Like, just start there. And your interviews will, like, almost by definition get immediately better. And don't pitch, early on. He got into this, and I like that. How did he put it? Like, the entrepreneur's superpower, is being able to get people to believe in your idea. I think there's definitely something to that. So many entrepreneurs and founders that I know are like, could be described and are described, as they're a force of nature. They command the room, blah blah blah, etc. Those are really great qualities to have in certain contexts. Those are terrible qualities to take into discovery interviews. Um, that's just, if you're not in sales mode, then those things, that if that describes you or if that describes your co-founder or your boss, those things that are really really great in certain situations, it is almost guaranteed to lead to or unprofitable, let's put it that way, unprofitable ideas getting onto the product roadmap, because the person on the receiving end of that conversation is just gonna, like, either go along with it because they're being, steamrolled, or hey, convinced that, yeah, that is a great New Year's resolution for me, or that is a better workflow that I should follow, and genuinely believe that. So just keep those things in mind, for sure. And let's see, we talked about the idea that even doing this as near to perfection as you possibly can, um, all you're doing is reducing uncertainty. You are not eliminating your risk, or you're not eliminating all of the risk. At some point, you have to decide and make the leap. Are we going to start creating some paper prototypes here? Are we going to start writing some code? Or are we going to declare time of death on this idea? If you continue to just keep doing, keep going research after research after research and looking for ways to invalidate the thing that you're doing, you'll eventually get there. There are always, can I even say that? I think I was going to say there are always more ideas, there are more reasons not to do something than there are reasons to do something, even things that are good ideas. And so if you're waiting for the reasons to do something to outnumber the potential reasons that you can find for it to fail or for it to be difficult, then you'll just never make the leap. And so, I like the idea of, okay, let's reduce uncertainty. Let's confirm that this is not a completely doomed to fail stupid idea. But at some point we gotta take a leap and start to try some things. Um, Yeah, and his point about our job, it's our job to find the truth, and not the customer's responsibility to just speak it, and to offer it up. That's pretty interesting. It's a bit of a can be a bit of a treasure hunt. Even that's it's a fine balance. If we look at it as if our job's to find the truth, we look at it as a bit of a treasure hunt. That's a fine balance between knowing when to dig in and to keep searching, and when at a certain point that becomes like forcing it, which is going to create in the in the customer's mind a sense of responsibility, or a sense of, oh, I can tell they're really trying to make this work. I want to offer something up, to encourage them, so that I can think of myself as a good person. So there's that fine balance between knowing when to keep digging in. I'll give you just one little example of this is I mentioned in this interview, with Rob, that I'm kind of exploring this idea of, remote work doesn't have to be lonely. Remote tools for remote teams. Definitely think there's something there. I've been interested in employee engagement, and employee motivation, that sort of thing for a really long time. And so I've been doing these interviews, trying to understand what are the problems that remote first teams and distributed teams face, in terms of employee engagement and employee communications, that co-located teams don't face, or don't face as in sharp of a relief. So I've been doing some interviews around that. And I was talking to this manager of a team, and just kind of asking, like, well, so what are you currently using? How are you currently solving that problem? And it sounded like they weren't actually using very many tools. It was just like, yeah, we use Zoom to do video chats. We schedule those kind of manually. It's like, any other, what other things are you doing to measure and monitor, how your employees are feeling? They're like, maybe you guys, you might describe them as either KPIs for measurement, or just like culture vibe. How are you doing any of those things? A series of questions about that. And wasn't it? She said they weren't doing anything. So to stop there, it'd be like, yeah, this is not important enough, for this company to be paying for it. Later on in the interview, just to kind of get a sense of, her awareness of tools that are available in the market, it's just like, hey, I'm just going to list a bunch of tools here. Just let me know if you've heard of them or not. And went through the list of Know Your Team, Office Vibe, Tiny Pulse, 15.5. And she was like, "Oh yeah, we totally use 15.5. That's so I can't believe I didn't say that earlier." And we had this entire conversation, about how they're using 15.5 to keep tabs on their employees, team members' well-being. And so it's so fascinating, like, that without that additional little bit of digging, then that piece of information would have gone completely unnoticed. So anyway, I just want to offer that up, that there's, as you're doing this, be aware that sometimes you keep digging, sometimes you let the answer lie as it is. It is getting qualitative feedback and information from conversations is far much more of an art than a science. And it's so good to have guidelines, and check sheets and suggestions that are offered up in books like The Mom Test by Rob, Lean Customer Development by Cindy Alvarez, and to keep those things in mind as you are conducting them. So yeah, I'll offer those things. I'll offer those things up, and I'll drop a couple. I've got a number of articles that I've written about this stuff as well. I'll drop those into the show notes. Feel free to take a look at those. Reach out if you have any additional questions about that. And if you're enjoying this show, it would be super, super helpful if you could leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. So if you're out for your jog right now, if you're doing the dishes or piddling around in the yard, just take a couple of minutes and leave a rating and review. It has the reason that helps is that it factors into how likely those directories are to make suggestions. The search the search functionality across the directories is famously pretty bad, but one of the things that is for sure consistent and truly does make a big difference is the number of ratings and reviews that a show gets. And so I could sure use some more of those. Would love your help in that way. If you could take just a minute or two to do that, would really appreciate it. And if you do, or if you got any questions at all about what you've heard on this episode or any other episode, you can always find me on Twitter. I am B-Ray. It's B-R-H-E-A. B as in bow, R as in rudder, H as in hull, E as in eye, and A as in anchor. Thanks again so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week.